What's up, Kansas City? I'm your host, Glenn Brian Frizzell. Today we are filming in the 18th and Vine Jazz District at the historic Lincoln Building. Today's special guest currently serves as Director of Professional Development and Inclusion at Ogletree and Deakins, Nash, Smoke, and Stewart, one of the nation's largest labor and employment law firms. We are privileged to have on our program today Attorney Michelle Wimes.
Thank you.
Welcome to What's Up, Kansas City.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Now, interesting fact, Attorney Wimes, when I was reading your resume, I understand that you studied in Spain and you're fluent in Spanish. Can you say something to our viewers in Spanish, perhaps?
Yes, bienvenidos al program de Kansas City.
Okay, and for us laymen, can you tell us what you just said?
I just said welcome to the Kansas City program.
Thank you. Your biography, resume, Attorney Wimes, reads like a who's who in a national publication. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I find it interesting that we're here in the historic Lincoln Building on 18th Street because I actually grew up on 18th Street, not far from here in Sycamore Groves, and went to St. Joseph's Catholic School, which is on 18th and Paseo, or was on 18th and Paseo. It's not there anymore. And I attend St. Monica Catholic Church. So I grew up in this neighborhood, loved this neighborhood, went to Bishop Hogan for high school, and then ultimately went to University of Missouri, Kansas City, UMKC, for my undergrad degree. Got my undergrad degree in communications and Spanish, and then headed to Tulane and New Orleans for law school. About 3 years after graduating from UMKC. I spent a year abroad. After I graduated from UMKC, spent a year in Spain, came back, taught school for 2 years, taught middle schoolers, 5th and 6th graders for 2 years at St. Monica, which is where I had grown up and gone to school myself, and then began practicing law. And I practiced law for about 14 years before I transitioned.
Now you said you taught at St. Monica. I went to St. Therese Little Flower.
Are you serious?
The year before they changed the name to St. Monica. We voted on that. I can remember the day we were in the cafeteria. Okay. They had catered Pizza Hut or whatever, and our principal, Miss Miller, said, "What do you guys?" Did you work with Miss Filka, any of them?
Yes, I worked with Miss Shelley Filka.
We're gonna have to talk after the interview.
Yeah,
Some
absolutely.
Of these people, yeah.
Absolutely. And I taught the first year that it became St. Monica, and I had a group of 4th and 5th graders, and I taught the whole language arts. I taught English, spelling, creative writing, and Spanish to 4th and 5th graders. And then the next year, that was in the St. Therese building, and then the next year they moved it to St. Joseph's, the old St. Joseph's grade school, and that became our campus. And then I taught the same group of kids. They became 5th and 6th graders that second year at the St. Joseph's building.
That is awesome.
So yeah, I know all of those people, Miss Miller, Miss Filka.
Now, you stated that you specialize in law. Can you tell us a little bit about what is employment law and labor law? What exactly?
Absolutely. You know, some people, when they talk about labor and employment law, they kind of talk about them hand in hand as if they're the same thing, but they really are different. Labor law governs the relationships between groups of employees who have organized into a union and management. So if you're a labor lawyer working at a law firm like me, you would represent the unions in union avoidance claims. You could have wage and hour claims, or you could have collective bargaining agreement claims. If you're an employment lawyer, instead of working with groups, like a union, you're focused on the individual rights of employees, right? So if individual employees bring discrimination claims or harassment claims pursuant to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, any of those individual laws that govern the individual rights of people would be what an employment lawyer does.
Okay, and how does your work take you into the realm of, I read that you do work with diversity?
I do.
And inclusion? Mm-hmm. Okay, and what way?
Yeah, I want to say, let's see, I've been in this position almost 3 years now, and then I was in my other position. So for the last 7 years, I've been focused on diversity and inclusion within the law firm context, right? And what that means is that I am developing programs, initiatives, and helping to develop policies that support a diverse and inclusive environment. So I want to make sure that our law firm is bringing in women and people of color and people of different sexual orientations to make sure that our environment is diverse and that those opinions and perspectives are brought to the table. So I focus on recruiting initiatives, getting people in the door. I also focus on retention initiatives. What does it take for them to stay here? How can we keep them, how can they develop? How can they continue to be successful? And then I also focus on advancement and promotion initiatives. So as they move along that spectrum of joining the firm, then staying with the firm, developing with the firm, and then ultimately moving into leadership positions in the firm. And that's different from affirmative action, right? So there's some people like to lump diversity with affirmative action, and that's different because affirmative action is more focused on, it's a mandatory thing that's mandated by the law and by regulations, and it's in the governmental sector. And generally affirmative action relates to two particular groups of people, and they're people who have been historically underrepresented, people who have been historically discriminated against, like women and people of color. Somebody like myself, a woman who happens to be a person of color, or it could be a white woman as well. And so affirmative action is society addressing those historical wrongs that happened to women and people of color in the past. And there's programs and policies that are related to that help them to get an equal footing in the workplace. Whereas diversity programs are voluntary. And those are really programs that not just focus on women and people of color, but it could be people of different marital statuses, it could be people of a different military status, a different sexual orientation. It could be whether a person that's disabled, and making sure that their voices and perspectives are heard in the workplace. And it's more of a leveraging of diversity as a strategic imperative, making sure that you're bringing all those voices to the table and they're helping the business to be better because of it.
Well, Attorney Wimes, you did mention people of color, and I would like to focus in on that.
Sure.
Not exclusively or inclusively, but just for a minute, we're going to
Sure.
talk about civil rights days. Whitney Young was really this eloquent voice who knew how to motivate and negotiate. He was really a model for the hiring of African Americans in all types of relevant fields. I just say his name because I read a little bit about him this summer, and there were documentaries, Attorney Wimes, about his role during the March on Washington, speaking to President Kennedy, lobbying for African American professional groups in his role out there with the Urban League. It was a time when our elders talked about being given the chance to do any job just as good, if not better, than the person currently doing it. How has the context surrounding the dynamics of diversity in the workplace changed since the March on Washington? Have we moved past, you said, affirmative action?
Yeah. I mean, the context has changed in that, instead of having mandated programs that are necessary, although we do still have some of those mandated programs, you now have companies that are voluntarily starting diversity programs because they recognize the importance of bringing people of color to the table and making sure that people of color have opportunities that they probably didn't have before. I will tell you that I think that the civil rights movement is not dead. It's just morphed into a different thing. I mean, we are fighting the civil rights battle in our schools and in our educational environments. We're fighting the civil rights battle in our workplaces today. In terms of schools, when I look at the Supreme Court decisions that have been done recently, I mean, you've got Grutter versus Bollinger that happened in 2003 with the U.S. Supreme Court, where they said race could be a factor when you're deciding who you're going to admit to your public university, right, or school. Whereas you fast forward in just March of this year in the Shute case versus Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action, 2014, the Supreme Court now says that it's okay for a state to amend its constitution and change its constitution so that they can say, we're going to ban affirmative action. And so that universities and schools that are in our jurisdiction, in Michigan in this case, in our jurisdiction, can no longer use race as a factor in admissions decisions.
So is diversity the new code word?
I think when you look at some of the people who are in positions of authority to bring diverse students into the school, I think that they're still going to be trying to do that, and they're going to have to get creative in how they do that. Now, what has happened is some schools are looking at economic factors. So instead of looking at race, because the new law bans them from doing it in certain states, what they'll do is use a person's economic status as a proxy for them being underrepresented. So, for instance, if a person comes from a lower socioeconomic background, does that mean that that person is a minority or that that person is underrepresented? And therefore, that's a person that we want to have here at the school because they bring a vital perspective or a vital opinion that we want to hear, and we want to help educate them. So I think, in terms of your question, I think we're fighting the civil rights battle every day. I think we're fighting it in schools. I think we're fighting it in the workplace. I think we're also fighting it when you talk about police brutality, and you look at the things that have happened in New York, and the guy who just recently was choked to death by the New York City Police Department, and just the things that we as minorities and people of color are still having to deal with in order just to make a living, in order to live in a decent neighborhood, in order to just walk the streets in many cases and be free of harassment and be free of discrimination. The civil rights battle is still alive and well, in my opinion.
We're still fighting that battle. Now, how important are the cultural role traits that we bring to, and I don't want to say stereotypes, but that we bring as unique individuals, whether we are African American, Asian American, Caucasian, Hispanic. How important are those character traits that we bring, and how do we arm ourselves and use them effectively in the workplace?
Oh, I think those character traits are very vital. I think that it does a disservice if you are a woman or you are a person of color and you are in a leadership position in an organization and you just spout off what the white men would be saying. So what value do you bring to the table if you're not utilizing your personal experiences as a woman or as a person of color or whether you're Asian or black or Hispanic or whatever, because you've grown up with different experiences than those white men around the table or white women around the table have had. So I think that we as people of color, we need to leverage those experiences when we get the opportunity to do so, and use those experiences to help educate other people about what we've been through and the challenges that we have, and how we can use those to the betterment of the organization. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Utilize personal experiences for the common good of the total cohesiveness of the organization. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I can give you an example of that. I mean, just yesterday I was on a phone call with my firm's managing partner. He is in charge of, we have about 700 lawyers across the country. We have 45 offices in 23 different cities. So we're in the United States, we're in Europe, we're in the Caribbean, right? And we have about 40 African American attorneys in the firm out of 700, which is not a lot, but it's more than most top 100 law firms in the country, sadly enough. So here I am on the phone with my managing shareholder, who is a white man who is very much supportive of diversity and inclusion and making sure that we bring different perspectives and different people to the table. But I'm also on the phone with our 40 black lawyers. Well, actually not all 40 of them, 20 of them who happen to be shareholders. So they are owners in the law firm. And I'm talking to them about what are the things that we need to do for the other 20 African American associates, the young people who are coming up, who were trying to move into leadership positions in the firm to be successful. And one of the things that we talked about in that call yesterday was unconscious bias training. How do we train the people that are in the majority to understand that sometimes they may have biases and stereotypes against people in the minority that impact who they give an assignment to, who they bring into who they hire for their office, who they promote right? Who they advance, and they don't even know it. We all have unconscious biases, but people in the majority, since they are in leadership positions, they more than anybody need to be aware of those unconscious biases. So again, having this conversation with this group of minority lawyers, and those lawyers were leveraging their own personal experiences to benefit younger attorneys who were coming up through the pipeline and through the ranks, and they all recognize themselves that at some time in their careers or sometimes in their lives, they've been subjected to bias and stereotyping and discrimination, and they want to make sure that the young lawyers who are coming up don't face that. So that's a good example of understanding your culture, understanding things that may have happened to you, and trying to use that experience so that it doesn't happen to other people.
Now, Attorney Wimes, who have been the influential role models, leaders in your life?
In my life, I would have to say my mom, and I know a lot of people talk about their parents, but my mom was instrumental in my success. My mom always emphasized education. We grew up lower middle class, if not upper lower class. I mean, we grew up in the hood. I grew up, on 18th Street. My mom now lives on 32nd and Benton Boulevard and Linwood, not far from Central High School. And my stepdad went to Central High School, as a matter of fact. And so my mom always emphasized it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what the resources are. What matters is what you have in your head and how hard you're willing to work.
Wow.
So if you have a work ethic and you work hard and you set a goal for yourself, you can achieve that goal. But you got to be willing to work hard, and you got to be willing to use the smarts, both the common sense street smarts and the education book smarts that you get. And so she always emphasized that, being smart, street savvy, but also being book smart. And I think that has served me well. It really has. And I would say also my father-in-law. I mean, we were talking to Mr. Nelson before the interview about my father-in-law, Chuck Wimes. And I would say that, Mr. Wimes was very influential on me as well. I know that he was a mover and a shaker in Kansas City, and then when I married my husband, he just has always been a person who stood for, ethics and doing well and doing right and supporting your community and giving back to your community. So that was important. And I learned something from that as well.
That is just awesome. Let me ask you a question about Ogletree and Deakins. I want to put an "and" in the middle there. Just Ogletree, Deakins.
Just Ogletree, Deakins, yeah.
The company has more than 40 offices and is located in 25 states, the District of Columbia, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Europe. Attorney Wimes, with such a vast playing field at its disposal, how is Ogletree Deakins important to the Kansas City community?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what? It's important to the Kansas City community because me and my team are here in Kansas City. So we are an international law firm, but our diversity and inclusion efforts are based in Kansas City, Missouri. So because of that, I have responsibility for the entire 45 office network, right? But because I'm in Kansas City, I take a special interest in making sure that we're supporting local and regional initiatives that support diversity at the university level, that support diversity in other businesses. And so I'm always going out and speaking about diversity and inclusion, the importance of it, supporting things that UMKC has. I know they just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act and Brown versus Board of Education. And they had a big thing there that my law firm sponsored as well. I know that the Centurions program, they have a leadership program for young up-and-coming leaders in Kansas City, so we support that. You name it, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Urban League, their Difference Makers Luncheon that they have every year. We support Gwen Grant and the Urban League. I just think it's very important when you are in a position of authority to give back to your community, and when you have a department like I have that sits in Kansas City, I think it's important to make a difference in the lives of people in the place where you are.
Now, you mentioned before how your mother and your father-in-law played a part in your leadership in terms of your role models who you looked up to and admired, and they were there for you during that time. Can you speak to someone? I believe that preparation is key. Can you speak to someone who maybe is not necessarily prepared, but is interested in diversity and inclusion, is interested in being the best that they can be? Not
prepared in what sense? Like not prepared, I mean, who want to go into diversity and inclusion, or I'm trying to understand what you mean.
Being an attorney, I believe, is a real tough field.
Right.
Being a lawyer, being on top of your game.
Right.
And sometimes you have different factors, whether it be education, economics, where you're not necessarily as prepared as someone else coming in.
Oh,
We
I
mentioned
see.
affirmative action, but if preparation is key, and we're speaking to someone today who maybe just be a little bit behind their classmates. Can you give them a word of encouragement on how they can catch up?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, just because you're behind your classmates does not mean that you won't be successful. I think that you have to have that drive. You have to have that determination. So even if it may take you a little bit longer to do something, I know for me, I didn't go straight from college to law school. I sat out for 3 years. And people said, oh, you're never going to go back to school. You're never going to go back to school. You better go right away. Well, I knew that if I went from college to law school right away, that I would have flunked out because I was tired by the time I got out of college. I did not want to go directly to law school. So I had that drive and that ambition that helped to move me forward, even when people were saying no. And I think that you're going to have times like that in your life. I mean, I remember being in college and majoring in Spanish 25 years ago when Spanish was not popular and people were not majoring in a foreign language, certainly not Spanish. And I remember people saying to me, what are you going to do with a Spanish degree in Kansas City, Missouri? You're in the middle of the Midwest. And certainly had I looked at those people and had I listened to them and taken their advice, I would not be where I am today, right? But I said, and my mother said to me, don't worry about that. Don't worry about how much money you can make in the future. Worry about what you're passionate about. What drives you, what motivates you. And whatever you're passionate about, you're going to be successful at. So here I was, getting a double degree in communications and Spanish, going abroad, living in Spain, perfecting the Spanish language, and lo and behold, going to law school. When I get back here to Kansas City to practice law, I pick up the phone one day and there is a recruiter calling me to come and work for a law firm that did international law situated right here in Kansas
awesome.
City. Isn't that amazing? So if I had listened to all of those people about what are you going to do with a Spanish degree in Kansas City, Missouri, I would never have been able to travel the world. And with this law firm, I traveled all over Latin America. I was in Brazil, Rio, where the World Cup was just held. I was in Brazil, I was in Mexico, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Panama. I was all over the place. And if I had listened to people, none of that would have happened. So I think the word of advice is always follow your heart. Determine what you're passionate about, and then don't let anybody get in the way of that. You know, to have that drive and determination to keep moving forward in spite of the negative stuff that people may say.
Fascinating. Attorney Wimes, thank you for that word of encouragement. Do you have any final words for our viewers?
No, I really don't. I thank you for allowing me to come and share my story today. I'm really appreciative anytime I get a chance to do that, and I thank you all for that.
Thank you, Attorney Wimes. We had today our special guest, Attorney Michelle Wimes, who is a diversity lawyer. Say your title again.
Director of Professional Development and Inclusion. Yeah.
Director of Professional Development and Inclusion, lawyer at Ogletree, Deakins. What's Up Kansas City? Make sure you go online and check out more video at www.whatsupkansascity.net. I'm your host, Glenn Bryan Frizzell. Remember, the sky is the limit. Aim high. If you shoot for the moon and you miss, at the very least, you would have landed among the stars. Take care until next time. Thank you.
CMG wants you to always remember, the victory we call success goes to the best prepared. When you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself.